Good morning, everybody. Being the weekend, I'm doing this at home instead of at the office, and so the quality may be a little bit different on the weekends than what we normally have during the week because of the setup, but hopefully it won't be too much of a problem. So, this morning we're going to do the three lessons that I found in Isaiah chapter 2. And there have been a few different questions and comments on some of the posts and videos already. And certainly we appreciate you doing that. Thank you to all of those who have been posting your lessons from chapter 1. I have enjoyed reading them. They've given me some ideas and some additional perspectives on some things, and I really appreciate it. So please keep doing it. And if you haven't, it's okay. If you're keeping a notebook or if you're just doing things in your head as you go along, that's fine. It just makes a very good exercise to pull into the chapters and see what it is that we find there. And so I hope that you will continue doing that. If you feel comfortable posting, please do. It's not a matter of seeing me testing you to see what you've seen or not seen. It's me truly wanting to see and us be able to communicate with each other what it is that we're finding. Sometimes it helps to give us additional ideas. Sometimes it works to be able to allow us to feel comfortable and confident with what it is that we're pulling out. So please continue to participate in those ways as well. That being said, the three lessons that I've pulled out of Isaiah chapter 2. The first one is found in the very early sections of chapter 2, in the first 4 verses, where there you see what I've simply called a prophecy fulfilled. It is one of the prophecies that Isaiah is going to give pertaining to the coming of the church. When you come to verses 2 through 4, it says, "Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. Many people shall come and say, Come and let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob. And he will teach us his ways, and we will walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem." Combining this with a number of other different passages, such as Joel chapter 2, Daniel chapter 2, and the things that are stated in Acts chapter 2, as well as Acts chapter 1, that Jesus is going to say to the disciples before his ascension, you find that Isaiah here is looking forward to the time when the church is going to be established in Jerusalem, and the things that are going to be proclaimed there through that will go out to all nations. And so one of the first lessons that I pull out of chapter 2 is a prophecy that Isaiah makes that is going to be fulfilled in the coming of the church. The second thing that I found in chapter 2 is from verses 5 and 6, where there we read, "O house of Jacob, come and let us walk in the light of the Lord. For you have forsaken your people, the house of Jacob, because they are filled with eastern ways. They are soothsayers like the Philistines, and they are pleased with the children of foreigners." It's interesting to me that in verse 5, the call goes out to the house of Jacob, and then in verse 6, the call goes out about the house of Jacob. And by that, I mean, I've taken from that this lesson, that when we have forsaken God, it also means we forsake our own people. It says, "O house of Jacob, walk in the light of the Lord, for you, the house of Jacob, have forsaken your people, the house of Jacob." You know, sometimes people think that when they turn their back on God, the only one that it affects is themselves. And yet the reality of the fact is, when we turn our back on God, we're not just turning our back on him, we are turning our backs on the people of God as well. And so from verses 5 and 6, I think you get an interesting point to be made, that the house of Jacob, the people of Judah, were not just turning their backs on God, but in doing so, they were turning their backs on each other. And it showed in the way that they treated and acted toward one another. But then the third thing that I found in chapter 2 is a phrase that is utilized 3 different times in this chapter. You see it in verse number 10, and then again in verse number 19, and again in verse number 21. And it is this phrase, the terror of the Lord and the glory of his majesty. These two statements of terror and glory are connected. They are combined by that word and. I looked up the word terror, and the Hebrew word for terror means to fear or to shake or to tremble. And so when we're talking about the things that God says he is going to do in bringing judgment upon Judah, it is going to be something that is going to be terrible. It's going to leave them shaking, and it's going to leave them trembling. But at the same time that it brings this terror, it also is going to bring his glory, or the other word for glory would be splendor. The splendor of his majesty, of his excellence. There is not going to be any doubt that the hand of God is behind it. There is not going to be any doubt of the majesty of God. And while the majesty of God is something that we generally think of in a positive aspect, God here is illustrating through Isaiah that the power that is going to be utilized is, yes, going to show his glory and majesty, but it is also equally at the same time going to bring about terror. The majesty of God can be seen in a couple of different ways, or from a couple of different sides. When we are ones who are on the side of God, the majesty of God brings about feelings of awe and wonder and very much the positive recognition. But when we find ourselves on the other end of the glory of God, of the might and the splendor of God, it also brings about in that very same moment fear and trembling. So those are the 3 things that I pulled out of chapter 2. What did you find? What things did you see as we examined this chapter? Just a note that we will not have a video on Sundays as we go through this study. We'll take Sundays for just our normal time and reflection with that. And so there will be a new video posted on Monday, and we will jump into chapters 3 and 4 then. Thank you for your time, for your study, and for your attention. And I hope you have a great rest of the week.